Nearly 31,000 Russian soldiers were killed or seriously wounded in July, marking the fifth month this year where Russia lost more men than they were able to recruit. And every one of these strikes verified on video. Now, those losses are adding up and have led to a change in U.S. intelligence assessment that now believes that because of the mounting challenges in Ukraine, Putin may try to directly test NATO in the near future. In fact, Russian hybrid warfare is already underway. And just this week, an explosive laden drone was found next to a Ukrainian plane parked at a German airport in what local officials there referred to as an attempted act of Russian terrorism against the NATO state. That's a big deal. Now, starting with the Russian losses in July, something I want to stress is every single one of these Russian soldiers raised their hands and volunteered to fight. I feel like that's often overlooked. There is not a draft in Russia right now. There is not forced mobilization in Russia right now. There's conversation that might come up before too long because of the continued losses and because of the challenges of continuing to get this many volunteers. But when you see a Russian soldier in the drone feed of a Ukrainian drone pilot, that is a volunteer. They raise their hand for the cause, for their country, or in most cases, for the money. Now, one of the areas that they're mostly recruiting from at this point are some of the poor and rural locations, certainly outside of Moscow, but they're starting to run into issues there as well. It's not that they're running out of manpower or they're running out of people. They're running out of people that are willing to volunteer is the issue. So we're seeing month after month, increasing challenges across the Russian military, increasing rates, increasing bonuses, increasing benefits to try to avoid mobilization and continue with what right now is fighting Ukraine is an all-volunteer force. So keep that in mind. Now, Robert Magyar, the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, released some stats a few days ago where he said the balance of enemy manpower for July and January through July as a whole remained negative. During July, drones operated by the Defense Forces of Ukraine eliminated or wounded 30,957 enemy personnel, while the enemy replenished its forces with 29,800 personnel. They rolled through a series of stats here to show what those numbers looked like starting in December, moving to today. And what that looks like is January, February, March, April, and July. Ukraine says that they're able to eliminate more Russian soldiers killed or seriously wounded, so taken out of the fight, than Russia was able to recruit. All in all, December through July, the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces say Russia brought in 245,000 recruits, and Ukrainian drones, the Ukrainian military, took off the battlefield 253,000 Russian soldiers. So that is a net balance of minus 8,299. They say these figures show that although we have managed for 8 months to prevent the enemy grouping from growing, it is still little more than a hamster wheel, a zero-sum situation and a clear sign of a war of attrition. And that's what most assessments are pointing to right now. When you look at the size of the Russian military and that they're still pulling in about 30,000 soldiers per month, 8,000 down over 8 months is honestly sustainable for the Russian military right now. Maybe not long-term, like years and years and years and years, but we're not really projecting this thing out 10, 15, 20 years in the future. It's going to be drastically different at this point. So another thing to consider here is if the Russian military decided to just pause assault operations for 1 month, because the vast majority of these casualties are coming when the individual soldiers step out and try to move across the gray zone. That's when they're getting killed and wounded. If they just pause for 30 days, these numbers drop off a cliff and you very quickly see a significant regeneration in the Russian military. The issue with that is from day one of this war, the Russian mantra has been that they're always advancing. They're always taking more territory. So it's unlikely that there's going to be a theater-wide pause anytime soon. In turn, that's why there is more and more talk about the possibility of mobilization coming up before too long. Now, it's not just the personnel at the front getting struck. We know the Ukrainian strikes against refineries, against the wild berries facilities, and the middle strike campaign is continuing as well. We just got some pretty interesting footage overnight showing, actually, I think the most interesting piece here, targeting Russian ships in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, was the Russian surface-to-air missile systems missing the Ukrainian drone. One of these looks like they missed 3 times. So they say this was the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces, said during the period of August 1st through 8th, operators of the Magyar Birds, the 20th K2 Brigade, and the 413th Raid Regiment struck another 12 vessels belonging to the Russian Shadow Fleet in the Black and Azov Seas. In total, Since the beginning of this operation from July 6th to August 8th, they've successfully targeted 218 vessels. Of these, 134 were in the Sea of Azov, 84 in the Black Sea. Now, an interesting note there is we've definitely seen a reduction in recent days. Again, if you're talking about 218 struck over the course of a month, but just 12 struck in the first 8 days of August, that's definitely a decline in a focus of that area of operations. We'll see what that looks like as we get into August, but there's a possibility there that they do ramp that back up if these targets continue to present themselves on the open water. Now, the major issue kind of coming out of all of this is the conversation about whether or not Putin will use this opportunity to try to test the NATO alliance. And I genuinely think there's an argument in both directions. The one that is being presented right now in the Wall Street Journal is that because Putin is in a tough place, he is more likely to test NATO because he needs a win on the home front. I think that there is just as much of a case to be made that Putin is in such a tough spot, he cannot afford to test NATO. I think it's a roll of the dice. It could go either way. The Wall Street Journal said, quote, the U.S. had previously assessed that Putin would not provoke a NATO country while he is still fighting in Ukraine. But that assessment changed earlier this year as Putin is squeezed in Ukraine and under pressure at home to secure a victory. That kind of goes back to the idea that Russia is unlikely at any point to pause offensive operations across the front. They need the momentum of success in the war zone. They say Russian President Vladimir Putin could try to test NATO's resolve with a limited assault on an allied country in the next few years, according to a new U.S. intelligence report that posit possible scenarios ranging from a cyber attack to a small-scale land incursion. I'm a little less sold on that. When we talk about what Russia is or is not capable of right now, a land assault is in the less than capable today. Be honest, the Russian military is very occupied in Ukraine. I find that unlikely. The Russian Air Force pretty significantly degraded from the onset of this war, not just in terms of the platforms lost, but the hours flown on some of these aircraft, the air defense systems that have taken a beating. Unlikely, in my personal opinion, that we see any sort of land incursion anytime soon, even into the Baltics. But when we get into that kind of gray zone hybrid warfare, it's already happening. It happened even more, or happened again here in recent days. They say the assessments described by U.S. officials come amid a shortfall in certain critical munitions that the military would need to confront Russia or China in a potential future war. Putin's goal in attacking NATO during a continuing war with Ukraine would be to fracture the alliance. A couple notes there. It's been all over the news in recent days. Multiple outlets, multiple officials off the record or kind of speaking on background, talking about the shortages in U.S. munitions. No doubt, adversaries around the world are paying attention to that. And it does signal an opportunity, all right? Whether or not anybody wants to take advantage of it, if we are really as low as some of those assessments suggest, it opens the door for someone to try something. Now, again, to stress here, the goal is not a war with NATO. Russia doesn't want that. They know that would not end well. They're in a bad spot compared to NATO in a lot of ways right now. Instead, what they're trying to do is fracture the alliance, get NATO to focus on anything other than their war in Ukraine, squabbling between each other, wondering, will Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, will that actually hold up? The more that Russia can kind of create and stir that infighting and the questioning within the alliance, the better it is for Russia. So to that end, what we've been seeing recently is a constant test of NATO airspace. Drone swarms in Poland back in September 2025, a missile impact in Poland last month, July 2026, a few months ago, May 2026, a drone impact on a Romanian apartment building, and just a few days ago, an explosive-laden drone on an airport in Germany. The Wall Street Journal reports, quote, an explosive-laden drone discovered at an airport in Germany this week likely belongs to the Russian government, according to U.S. officials familiar with intelligence reports about the incident. The drone was spotted on the tarmac at the Leipzig-Halle airport in eastern Germany on Tuesday night in a secure area near a Ukrainian cargo jet, prompting the airport to shut down for the night. Authorities are also looking into a second unidentified object that collided with a cargo plane after the plane aborted its landing at Leipzig due to the closure. The plane suffered minor damage and landed safely at a nearby airport. We're talking about the likelihood that Russia tries to carry out something in this gray zone, like we have to be looking at drones, right? We've seen significant innovation inside of Russia at what this could look like. I would be surprised if they don't try something like this. The Guardian added some additional context here, saying one of the Ukrainian aircraft next to where the bomb drone was found was loaded with military ammunition, according to a classified police report. The Interior Minister said that the drone only did not function because a detonator had been damaged. There was another report that one of the guys on the tarmac, one of the workers there, kicked the drone out of the air, which is just like a surefire example or like verification of not operating in a war zone, right? You see something, you don't know what it is, you kick it. Like, that's the last thing you do in an active war zone. But of course, German airport's not an active war zone. So it sounds like one of the possibilities here is the guy either ran over it, maybe kicked it out of the air, or maybe it was a bad detonator. Either way, Robert Kaiserwetter, a member of the German Parliament's Intelligence Committee, said, quote, "I believe that the attempted drone attack at Leipzig airport was a targeted hybrid attack. In other words, an attempted act of terrorism orchestrated by Russia." Now, the response to this in the Russian media right now is referring to it as a false flag, suggesting that Ukraine did it. Ukraine planted the drone, and Ukraine was going to try to detonate the drone against their own aircraft had it not been found in order to spark some sort of NATO response. Again, this idea of hybrid warfare, kind of terrorism, and just in that gray zone where it's not entirely clear, do you respond or do you not, is right up Russia's alley, something they've done for a long time. But right now we have the United States and Germany saying all evidence points to this being Russia. Now, this is where NATO needs to stand firm. Turning to a personal assessment here, sabotage and terrorism are very, very, it's not like you can push a button and say, that's it. We are completely protected against sabotage. We are completely secure against terrorism. That's very hard to detect and stop, no doubt. But air defense needs to be increased, full stop. We need to work with Ukraine to coordinate a no-fly zone along their western border that borders NATO countries. So it bleeds into Ukraine just a little bit. We set up a no-fly zone there, shoot down anything that looks like it's headed into NATO territory. This would show a united stance across the NATO alliance, and honestly, it would prevent Russia from making a catastrophic mistake of striking NATO territory and sparking a wider war. Because again, we are pretty regularly seeing explosive drones, reconnaissance drones, and missiles fly into NATO territory. All right, it requires unanimous consent across the alliance to enact Article 5, but this is the type of thing where, I mean, let's be honest, a Russian missile flying all the way into Poland, how exactly precise are we expecting it to be? What happens if it goes off course? What happens? Playing with fire, all right? So let's put up a no-fly zone, make sure those Russian munitions do not enter NATO airspace 1 inch. Now, quick fundraiser update here. We have raised nearly $10,000 through merch sales for Ziggy's Paw and Car for Ukraine, going directly to support those organizations. So this is something we stood up just 2 months ago, and we've got some posters, shirts, and T-shirts from Ziggy's Paw, and then shirts and sweatshirts from Car for Ukraine. 100% of the profits from those sales go directly to support those organizations, and we just did the roll-up for July, the second full month. It is now nearly $8,000 for Ziggy's Paw and over $2,000 for Car for Ukraine. That's incredible. Like, I thought some of these would sell. I had no idea we'd be talking about this volumes. Of course, if interested, there's a link in the description below to check that out. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.